I was staring out the window of the hotel lounge in Amsterdam when the call came through. The sky was the kind of gray that feels like it's leaning in on you, heavy, low, and cold. I had just wrapped a deal for a distribution center outside the city, something I'd been working on for nearly 6 months. Clean deal, good margins, everything tied up with a bow. I thought the day couldn't go any smoother. Then my phone buzzed. Lauren's name lit up the screen. No text, no FaceTime. Just a straight call, something she hadn't done in months. I picked up without thinking. "Hey," I said. There was a pause. Then her voice flat but oddly cheerful. "Hi. I figured it was better to just get this over with. I'm leaving you, Daniel. Aiden and I are starting over." The silence on my end lasted longer than she expected. I didn't respond. I let her keep talking. "I sold the beach house." "Got a pretty good price, actually," she said with a little laugh, like she was announcing a promotion at work. "The buyer's moving in next week, so you'll probably want to book the Marriott when you get back. They've got that business package you like, right?" I looked out at the canal below. A man in a suit was struggling to control his umbrella in the wind. I kept my voice steady. "When did you close the sale?" She hesitated just a beat. "Yesterday." "You didn't notice the account transfer yet?" "No," I said calmly. "Been busy with the contract here." There was a faint sound on the line. "Maybe annoyance, maybe surprise." "You're taking this better than I thought," she said after a moment. "I figured you'd yell." I didn't yell. I didn't ask why. I didn't even ask who Aiden was. I already knew. The trainer. 35. Tan, overconfident, and always a little too comfortable in our kitchen when I came home early from meetings. "I'll figure something out," I told her. "Thanks for letting me know." That ended the call. No tears, no threats, just a clean break, at least on the surface. I stared at the screen for a while after. My reflection in the black glass looked older than it had an hour ago. The truth was, I'd been waiting for this call for months. And not just waiting. Preparing. I didn't go to the hotel bar. I didn't call a friend. I didn't break down or rage. I sat down at the desk, opened my laptop, and typed 2 emails, one to Rebecca Lang, my attorney of 20 years, and one to Martin Cho, my title agent and longtime friend. Subject line, urgent possible fraudulent property sale. I attached a few notes, flagged a reminder in my calendar, then closed the laptop. Outside, the wind picked up, pushing rain sideways across the windows. I watched people below duck into shops and trams. Life kept moving. Lauren didn't understand who she was dealing with. She thought I was predictable passive, the guy who stayed late at the office and left her in charge of the house. She thought she could catch me off guard and walk away with everything. What she didn't know, what she never cared to learn, was that I'd made a career out of outmaneuvering people who thought they had leverage, and she just triggered the wrong contract. 16 years ago, I met Lauren at a commercial real estate expo in Atlanta. She was working the floor for a boutique interior design firm, sharp in a navy suit and confident in a way that turned heads without trying. I remember her laughing at one of the more obnoxious sales reps who tried to mansplain staging strategies to her. She cut him off mid-sentence with a smile and corrected him without breaking stride. That's what drew me in. She was quick, unbothered, and clearly used to getting her way. We grabbed drinks after the expo. 6 months later, we were living together. A year after that, we were married in a courthouse ceremony with her sister and my brother standing in for the absent crowd. We weren't the sentimental type, or at least I wasn't. We bought the beach house 3 years later. Amelia Island. Oceanfront. 4 bedrooms, wraparound deck, aging roof that needed work. It cost almost everything I had saved, and then some. I poured myself into the renovations every weekend, citing new kitchen, rebuilt deck boards, pest-proofed crawl spaces. She made it beautiful inside. "This is our forever place," she said one night barefoot on the deck with a wine glass in hand as waves rolled in below us. For a decade, it felt like that might actually be true. Lauren quit her design job a few years in and started her own freelance business. That gave her the flexibility to travel with me sometimes. We'd tag weekends onto business trips, Barcelona, Tokyo, Prague. It made things feel less like work and more like a life we'd built together. But things started shifting about 2 years ago. At first it was small. She stopped asking about my deals, skipped the usual questions about my clients. Her texts got shorter. "Safe flight, replace Miss You." She claimed she wanted to recenter, so she joined a gym downtown 5 days a week, personal training with a guy named Aiden Wolf. I met him once. Too tan, too smooth. Asked me how much my Rolex cost like it was a joke, but his eyes stayed on it too long. Then came the new expenses, $600 spa weekends dinners for two that didn't include me boutique hotel stays under the name of a girls' retreat. I didn't call her out. I didn't install a tracker. I didn't even bring it up. I just started watching more carefully. There's a saying in my industry, the best counter to a hostile bid is quiet preparation. That's what I did. About 11 months ago, I refinanced one of our rental properties in Charleston. We had to sign a thick stack of papers. I buried the trust transfer for the beach house right in the middle, folded neatly between a lender affidavit and the flood insurance clause. She signed every page without looking up from her phone. Martin had warned me she probably wouldn't notice. Rebecca had drafted the language tight. "This protects us both," I'd said, handing her the pen. That wasn't a lie. The trust would protect the house. It just wouldn't protect her. Afterwards, she gave me a quick kiss on the cheek and said she had to run to yoga. I stayed in the office an extra hour filing the notarized deed into a fireproof envelope. I've carried that envelope with me ever since, every trip, every hotel, every country. Lauren used to joke that I read contracts like other people read novels. Life's too short for fine print, she'd say. But in the end, that fine print is all that stood between me and losing everything. There's a reason I've made it in the commercial property world for 3 decades without getting burned. It's not charm, it's not charisma, it's precision. I've closed deals that fell apart in other people's hands because I look at the lines most people skim. I ask the questions that make the room go quiet. I don't move fast, I move smart. I've always kept hard copies of important documents in my travel case. A habit that started after a Japanese logistics firm tried to pull out of a contract last minute in the mid-2000s. They claimed the signed agreement had never been finalized. I pulled the original from my bag in a hotel lobby and handed it to their lead negotiator. End of story. So when I reached into my case in that Amsterdam hotel and pulled out the deed to our beach house, it didn't feel dramatic. It felt like insurance finally paying out. The paper was crisp, notarized, and clean. At the top, Mercer Living Trust. Below that, in clear black ink, Daniel Mercer, sole trustee and beneficiary. Lauren's name wasn't on the deed. Hadn't been for nearly a year. I remembered the day I'd set it up, Rebecca Lang, my lawyer, leaning across her office table in Charleston, tapping her pen against the draft. "This won't stop her from being angry," she said, "but it'll stop her from taking the house." That was back when Lauren had already started staying late at yoga. I wasn't ready to confront her, but I was done assuming good intentions. We structured the trust to absorb the property and wrap the paperwork in a refinancing package she signed without hesitation. Rebecca had paused before finally asking, "You want to tell her?" "No," I'd said. "If I'm wrong, no harm. If I'm right, this keeps the fallout contained." Now here we were. I called Rebecca from the hotel room. It was late in Amsterdam, but early morning in Charleston. She picked up on the second ring. "I assume this isn't a social call," she said. "No," I replied. "Lauren called. She says she sold the beach house." There was a pause. "Then that's not possible," I figured. "But she thinks she did. Probably forged something or submitted an offer under false authority." "She can't sell what she doesn't own," Rebecca said. "I'll call Martin and notify the county. If any paperwork has been filed, we'll get it flagged and blocked. Title companies will be warned off too. What about the buyer? We'll contact them once we have names. If they're acting in good faith, they'll walk. If not, well, we'll find out who they are." Her voice was calm, surgical. That's why I kept her close. No drama, just facts. "Thank you," I said. "Daniel," she added, "you did the right thing, setting up the trust and keeping quiet." After we hung up, I sat in the silence of the hotel room for a long time. The city outside had turned blue and silver in the rising daylight. Trams passed quietly on the street below. Lauren thought she was 10 moves ahead, but she'd only gotten that far because I let her think I wasn't playing. She called me predictable. And maybe I am. I keep my watch on the same wrist. I eat at the same restaurants on business trips. I reread contracts twice before signing, but predictability isn't weakness. Predictability is control, and right now I had all of it. I didn't tell Lauren I was flying home. I didn't want the locks changed before I got there. The flight landed in Charleston late Friday night. I rented a car, stopped by my apartment for the trust paperwork and my spare key, then made the drive out to Amelia Island in silence. No music, just the steady rhythm of the road and a quiet tension I'd stopped calling anger. When I pulled into the driveway, there was a black Mercedes convertible in my usual spot. Aiden's car, no doubt. It was the kind of car that looked like it came with a monthly payment higher than his rent. The front door was unlocked. Voices floated from the kitchen. I paused in the foyer listening. I'm telling you, Aiden was saying we take out the wall between the living room and the dining space, you've got instant resale value. Beach homes are all about open concept. I stepped inside. Lauren stood at the island champagne in one hand, wearing a sundress I didn't recognize. Aiden stood close behind her arm, around her waist, pointing at something on his tablet. She turned first, her smile freezing for half a beat. Daniel, she said, recovering quickly. You're back early. Clearly, I said, dropping my suitcase by the door. Aiden straightened, pulled his arm back. This is awkward. I should probably stay, I said. This concerns you too. Lauren's posture shifted. The lightness drained from her tone. Daniel, let's not make this ugly. I've been unhappy for a long time. We both know this was coming. We deserve a clean break. I walked to the counter, opened my briefcase, and laid the paperwork down. You mean a clean theft? I said calmly. She frowned. What is that? The trust deed for this house. You signed it 11 months ago, remember? Buried in those refinancing documents you didn't bother to read. Her fingers hovered over the papers like she was afraid to touch them. Aiden leaned in, trying to read. You said the sale was final, he muttered. It was, Lauren snapped, but I saw the doubt creeping into her eyes. Check the deed, I said. This house hasn't legally been yours to sell for almost a year. The Mercer Living Trust owns it. I'm the sole trustee, no joint ownership, no spousal claim. You tricked me, she whispered, scanning the document. No, I said. I protected what you thought you could steal. That's not trickery, that's planning. Aiden took a step back. I should go. I looked at him. Not yet. See, you're involved now. You were planning renovations on property your girlfriend doesn't legally own. That's called intent to defraud, if we're being formal. He froze. I didn't know. You do now, I said. Lauren's hand was shaking. You don't have to be cruel. I'm not being cruel, I replied. I'm being thorough, something you clearly underestimated. She tried a different tactic, her voice softening. Daniel, be reasonable. We can still work this out. Split the proceeds, move on. There are no proceeds, I said. There's no sale. The buyer has been notified. Title companies are on alert. Any attempt to process that transaction will be blocked. Aiden was pale now. Wait, what buyer? Don't worry, I said. Your brother will be hearing from my lawyer shortly. Lauren's face dropped. How do you... I know everything I cut in, and I'm done playing dumb. They didn't say anything. For a long moment, the only sound in the room was the soft fizz of her champagne glass still bubbling beside the tablet. I picked up my suitcase. I'll be staying at the Hilton tonight, I told her. To give you space. But just so we're clear, this house isn't yours to sell, and I'll be moving back in on Monday. As I turned to leave, Lauren finally found her voice again. This isn't over, Daniel. I looked back at her standing in my kitchen, in our kitchen, with someone else's arm still fresh on her waist. Actually, I said, I think it is. The next morning, I met Rebecca at her office downtown. It was Saturday, so the place was mostly empty. No paralegals buzzing around. No echo of conference calls behind closed doors. Just her, a mug of black coffee, and a manila folder, already waiting for me on the table. She didn't waste time. There's more, she said, sliding it toward me. Inside were bank statements, transfer records, and flagged expenses dating back nearly a year. Lauren hadn't just withdrawn funds, she'd rerouted them. Slowly, quietly, $158,000 had been pulled from our joint savings and funneled into a separate account under her name. She'd started last summer. A little at a time. Never enough to trigger alerts, but consistent. She was testing the boundaries, Rebecca said, making sure you weren't watching. There was more. She flipped to a lease agreement, retail space on Broughton Street in Savannah, signed by both Lauren Mercer and Aiden Wolfe, a boutique fitness studio, Rebecca explained. Signed 3 months ago. Deposit paid. Build-out starts in 2 weeks. I stared at the pages. The plans, the business filings, even the branding, Coast Form Fitness. It was real, not a pipe dream, not some post-divorce fantasy. They had been working toward this while still sleeping under my roof. She wasn't trying to leave you, Daniel, Rebecca said. She was trying to replace you, take your money, your property, and fund a new life with it. I nodded slowly, the full picture locking into place. She needed capital, I murmured. The house wasn't just emotional leverage, it was startup money. That's why she tried to move fast, Rebecca added. She didn't want you back on U.S. soil before it closed. And the buyer, I asked. She handed me one more document, corporate ownership disclosure for the shell company listed on the sale. Jason Wolf, she said. Aiden's brother. I leaned back, a hollow laugh escaping my throat. So they wanted the house at below market value. Sell it later, flip the profit? Exactly. Probably thought you'd panic and negotiate just to keep it. It was all there, a blueprint, a coordinated financial ambush dressed up as a breakup. Lauren hadn't just fallen in love with someone else, she'd built an escape plan using every resource she could siphon from my life. Every conversation I thought we'd had about our future, every decision I thought we'd made together, she'd been cashing those in behind my back. This wasn't emotional, I said. It was tactical. Rebecca's voice softened. I know this is hard to swallow, but we have options. Criminal if you want, grand theft, attempted fraud, civil penalties at minimum. But, she let the word hang. You don't want to see her in jail, I finished. No. You want restitution, control, closure. I nodded. Then we do this surgically, she continued, pulling out a draft agreement. You keep the house. We push for return of 60% of the transferred funds. She waives any claim to your properties or business. You waive claim to hers. No criminal charges as long as she complies. And if she doesn't, then we go scorched earth. I didn't say anything for a long time. Just stared at the numbers, the signatures, the paper trail of a marriage dissolved by greed. This wasn't just about betrayal, I said quietly. It was about erasure. She wanted to erase everything I built and thought I wouldn't see it coming. Rebecca closed the folder and looked me in the eye. But you did. I exhaled through my nose. Let's send her the offer and prepare for court. Something tells me she won't take the smart way out. By Monday afternoon, I was back at the beach house. Lauren's car was gone, but the Mercedes convertible was still in the driveway. Aiden. Of course. I unlocked the front door with my key still worked and stepped inside. The house was quiet except for the sound of drawers opening and closing in the living room. Aiden was there, stuffing shirts into a duffel bag like he couldn't decide whether to leave or pretend this had all been some kind of misunderstanding. When he looked up and saw me, he froze. I was just grabbing my things, he said quickly. I stood in the doorway, arms folded. Looks like you're packing more than just your gym bag. He gave a half-hearted chuckle. Look, man. This wasn't personal. I didn't respond, just kept watching him. She told me things were over between you two, he continued. That she was trapped, that you were never home and always trying to control everything. That's what she told you, I asked. He nodded. And the part where you two tried to sell my house through your brother's shell company, did that feel personal or just good business? His eyes widened. You don't know what you're talking about, he said, but his voice cracked. You're opening a gym together. You needed startup cash. She tried to fund it with a fraudulent sale of property she didn't own, and your brother Jason tried to help you launder the transfer. I know everything. He swallowed hard, looking toward the door like it might save him. I'm not pressing charges, I said. Yet. That got his attention. There's a settlement offer at my attorney's office. Lauren has 48 hours to respond. If she agrees to the terms restitution, full relinquishment of claims, we walk away clean. If she doesn't, I let that hang there. You go public, he whispered. No, I corrected. Then I go legal. Full discovery. Fraud charges. Possibly grand theft. Jason gets named as a co-conspirator. Every move you two made gets traced and cataloged. He sat down slowly on the edge of the couch, the weight of it finally hitting him. What do you want me to do? He asked. Start with this. Tell your brother to formally withdraw the offer on this house by 5 p.m. today. If I don't hear from the agent, we're filing. Aiden nodded, stood up, and grabbed his bag. He paused in the doorway, still trying to find some kind of redemption. She said you didn't care anymore, he said. That you'd already checked out. She said a lot of things, I replied, but I still own the house, and I still know how to protect what's mine. He left without another word. 2 hours later, Rebecca called. Jason Wolf had rescinded the purchase offer, citing title complications. We both knew what that meant. By sunset, I'd changed the locks, reprogrammed the garage opener, and deactivated the old security system. I installed a new one cameras this time. Not because I was afraid, because I was done assuming people were harmless just because they smiled. I ordered takeout from the seafood place down the road. Lauren and I used to go there on weekends. I ate alone on the deck as the sky turned soft orange and the waves kept rolling in steady and unbothered by the drama of human lives. I didn't feel victorious, but I felt intact. That was enough for now. 3 weeks later, we sat on opposite sides of Rebecca's conference table. Lauren hadn't spoken to me since that morning in the kitchen. Every message since had come through her lawyer, some fresh out of law school hotshot with too much gel in his hair and a briefcase that looked like it had never touched the ground. He smiled when we walked in, like he thought this was just another negotiating game. Rebecca didn't smile back. Before we begin, she said calmly, "I'd like to submit these into evidence." She slid 3 documents across the table, one by one. The trust deed, the bank statements showing systematic withdrawals from our joint accounts, an affidavit signed by Jason Wolfe confirming his role in the shell purchase scheme. Lauren's lawyer glanced over them. His face dropped halfway through the affidavit. He leaned toward her and whispered something. She didn't nod or blink, just stared forward stone still. Rebecca continued like she was reading a lunch order. "Our terms remain the same," she said. Lauren returns $100,000 of the misappropriated funds. She relinquishes all claims to the Amelia Island property and any other assets under the Mercer Living Trust. Daniel waives any claim to her business venture and agrees not to pursue criminal charges provided these conditions are met in writing today. Lauren finally turned her head toward me. First time in weeks. Her voice was quiet but cold. "And if I don't," Rebecca didn't flinch. "Attempted real estate fraud, grand theft, and civil conspiracy to commit title fraud," she said, listing them off with clinical precision. "The documentation is complete. Law enforcement has been briefed. If we proceed, it will be criminal, not just civil." Her lawyer cleared his throat. "We'd like a moment to discuss this in private." They stepped out into the hallway. Rebecca didn't say anything, just began organizing her notes. I watched the door. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even tired. I was just ready. Ready to stop being dragged through someone else's wreckage. 17 minutes later, they returned. Lauren wouldn't look at me. "We accept the terms," her lawyer announced. Rebecca nodded and slid the paperwork across the table. One for her, one for me. I signed my name without hesitation, then waited while Lauren picked up the pen. Her hand shook just slightly. Not enough for anyone else to notice, but I saw it. I knew that hand better than my own. I'd watched it sign tax returns, birthday cards, anniversary notes. Now it signed the end of a marriage. She capped the pen and pushed the paper away. It was done. There was no apology, no eye contact, no final word. That was fine with me. This wasn't a movie. I didn't need closure and dialogue. I had it in ink. 6 months later, I stood on the deck of the beach house, coffee in hand, watching the sunrise break over the Atlantic. The place looked different now. I'd renovated the kitchen, ripped out the tired backsplash Lauren had insisted on, and replaced it with something simple and clean. I installed hurricane-rated windows, swapped out the siding for something modern and durable, and repainted the entire interior. Not for resale, for permanence. It didn't feel like our house anymore. It felt like mine. I hadn't heard from Lauren since the settlement signing. Not directly, anyway. A few mutual friends mentioned she and Aiden had opened their boutique fitness studio in Savannah, smaller than they'd planned, scaled-down equipment, fewer clients than they'd hoped. A startup on the edge of sputtering. I didn't feel smug about that. No part of me needed to see her fail. I wasn't rooting against her, but I also wasn't rescuing her. That part of my life was over. The divorce had finalized 3 months ago. No appeals. No revisions. The judge signed the order and the terms were executed exactly as Rebecca outlined. Lauren returned the $100,000 less than she took, but more than she expected to have to give up. I took that money and invested it into a small commercial property in downtown Charleston. Brick building, 4 tenants, steady rental income. Simple, safe, predictable. Just how I like it. My phone buzzed in my back pocket. Martin Cho. "Just checking in," he said when I answered. "How's the beach house?" "Getting better every day," I replied, watching a pair of pelicans glide low across the water. "Thanks again for the help with the trust setup. That's what friends are for," he said. "Actually, I've got another one for you. Similar deal structure, commercial good neighborhood, solid protections. Send me the details," I said. "I'm interested." After we hung up, I stayed on the deck for a long while. The wind rolled off the water in slow gusts, steady and cool. The sound of the ocean never changed. It didn't care about lawsuits or betrayal or balance sheets. It just kept moving forward. People say houses are just wood and nails. I used to believe that. But this place, this house became something else. A line in the sand. A reminder that no matter how careful you are, someone can still betray you. But it's what you do next that matters. You can fall apart, or you can rebuild. I took another sip of coffee and headed inside to get ready for the day. I had new contracts to review, tenants to meet, a life to run, and this house would still be standing.